All righty, well, here we go.
Yay.
All right. Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Molly Burrows. I am the Craft Boston manager at the Society of Arts and Crafts. And I'm here today with Alisa Banks, who is currently participating in our online exhibition, Craft Boston Fiber Stories. Hi, Alisa.
Hi.
We're going to be chatting about Alisa's work, the story of her journey in the fiber arts, and much more today. But before we get started, I want to say a huge thank you to our partners and sponsors in presenting this show. And if you'll give me just a moment here. Thank you so much for your support. We truly couldn't do it without you, and we're so grateful for what you do for us here at the Society of Arts and Crafts. There we go. All right. And without further ado, allow me to introduce Alisa. Alisa Banks is a visual artist who creates sculptural books, textile collage, and multimedia work to address identity politics. She frequently incorporates fibers and found materials that reference traditional craft techniques. Her work has been exhibited in Canada, Africa, Asia, Europe, and throughout the US, and is housed in several private and public collections, including the Smithsonian Institution, the US Library of Congress, and the New York Public Library. Alisa, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Molly. Thank you for that nice introduction and for the invitation.
Absolutely. So I'm hoping you can get us started here today by going back to the very beginning of your career as a fiber artist. What was the first fiber artwork that you created, and how does it compare to the work that you're doing today?
Well, interestingly, I was in grad school. My training is in painting. I was an oil painter. And last semester of grad school, I just happened to go into the library. It was hot. I remember it was so hot. And I just had to get inside in the air conditioning. And I like to just browse library shelves. I go up and down the aisles. And for some reason, there was this big book with a cloth cover, didn't have any title on it or anything. I just remember something about it. I just wanted to just pull it down, open it up, and there were, it was on the G's Bend quilters. And so, well, of course it just kind of reminded me of my grandmother's quilts, even though her quilts were more the scrappy type quilts and smaller pieces. But it just kind of really resonated. And from that point on, it just made total sense. I always sewed, had lots of family that did craft things with fabric and thread. And so it just kind of connected. And so that was my first foray into it. And since then, when I was in grad school, what I did, I went back to my studio, I cut up most of my oil paintings and refashioned them into quilt-like objects. And that was pretty much the start of the journey.
Well, that's incredible. I love that, you started in something that ostensibly seems a little bit different than fiber art with oil painting, but then that ended up being a material that you could recycle into new work. I love that connection and that through line from start to where you are now. So I know we have likely a number of quilters in the audience. A number of them follow us here at the Society of Arts and Crafts. So I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about how you see your work in relation to quilting. I know you describe it as textile collage, but sort of where does that quilting influence come in, and where do you see the boundary between a traditional quilt and some of your work?
Well, I actually used to belong to a couple of quilting groups. And I also exhibited some of my work in quilt shows. And most of the quilt shows that I was in, they made a very, the designation of what was a quilt and what was not a quilt was that it had to have 3 layers and with stitching. And so those are the pieces that I considered acceptable to put into a quilt show. But when I'm making the work, when I look at it, some of it looks quilt-like, but it doesn't have three layers, or maybe it has more than 3 layers. And so I just wanted to have a word, something that encompassed both of those, because I see them along the same vein. I see them very much as book-like objects, even though they may be two-dimensional. And then they may have that third layer in there of stitching, or they may not. And so I just kind of call them collage, because that's the way in which I create them. And that I don't have to worry about the number of stitches or anything. So it's just a shorthand way of calling them.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't realize that that the 3 layers would be such a key point for quilters, but that makes a lot of sense. They've got to draw a line somewhere. So I know that you separate your work out into 3 main themes: the body collection, the terrain collection, and home. And I'm wondering what drew you to those specific topics and how you see them relating to each other.
Yeah, so those topics are ones that I just kept coming back to. I'm really inspired by my parents' home, I guess I want to call it homeland, but they're from Southern Louisiana. And so that serves as an inspiration, not just the culture, but also the land itself, and my interest in gardening, my interest in body politics, and my interest in that area kind of frames those three themes. Now there's some overlap, of course, but generally speaking, those are the 3 things that I just keep coming back to. And even if it's not related, or doesn't appear to be related, for instance, I did a book called Black is Every Color. I think I have a picture of that one too, but
Oh, yeah.
it's about the color black, but it's still about the body. So even though it seems like it may not fit, most of my interests are going to fit in those 3 areas somehow.
Absolutely. And I would love to see a photo of that book if you've got it handy, but maybe before we move to that, I think there's also something, those 3 themes are fairly universal. Everybody can relate to the idea of having a home or a homeland that they come from, and, having a body and having a connection to a specific place. So are you looking for something that helps to make a strong connection like that with your viewers?
Yeah, I actually am. I think that the stories themselves are personal stories, whether they're my stories or my interpretation of someone else's story that they've given me, because I'm interacting with their story, right? So, and it's not going to be their story from their mouths, even if they've interviewed, which sometimes I'll get through interviews. But yeah, that's one of the reasons why I like the quilt-like objects, the textile collages, is that people just seem to really relate to quilts. Whether they have them, in their collection, if they have a quilt or not. For some reason, I would always get several people that would stop by and say, yeah, I haven't seen this in a while. It kind of reminds me of X, this situation or this person or whatever. And so I think the materials sometimes allow an entry into the story. And even though the stories may be of something specific, I think that I don't want to use the word universal, but I think that there's always an entry point where someone can at least kind of say, yeah, I kind of see that.
Yeah,
that's not my situation, but I can kind of see that.
Yeah, there's something very relatable. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And would it be possible for us to see maybe an example or 2 from each of those different collections, so that folks who are watching along with us, I know I've been all over your website looking at your work, but we'll give everybody else a chance to take a look.
Sure, let me just open up the share screen here.
Oh, sure.
And hopefully can you see that?
Oh, yeah, we are good.
Excellent. So when I'm talking about a quilt-like object, let me just go to this one, for instance. Okay, so this one is basically, it could be a quilt because it's got 3 layers and it's got the stitching.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's very much put together like a collage. I put pieces together. It's not planned, it's very improvisational. And most of my work, with the exception of the books, are quite improvisational.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a progress of another part where you can kind of see, yeah, it does look collagey, but it does have stitching. Now,
Mm-hmm.
this one looks like a quilt, but it only has 1 layer. So technically, I couldn't put this in a quilt show, or at least the ones that have the stipulation that it has to be 3 layers stitched together, right? Okay, so let me go back to my slide sorter here so I can kind of.
And just quickly, so which collection were those works from? Those were from Terrain, I think?
Yes, those are from Terrain. So
Okay.
most of the ones that are, here's another one. Most of the ones that have plant materials in them are from the Terrain series.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have something like a home series
Mm-hmm.
where you have something like this one. And so this one could go in a quilt show because it's got at least 3 layers stitched together. Still very collagey. And that's the way it was put together. So that's another, that's an example of my home series. And there's another one. And then this is another one. Now, this is where it kind of gets blurred. So it looks like it could be Terrain, which it definitely could be. But it's also home series because of the text that's in it. The text has a lot about, so this basically is handmade paper. And several of my family members from around the country at the time sent me some of their plants through the mail, dried plants. And I incorporate it into this handmade paper, and then it makes a quilt. And then the text is all about what they thought about their gardens. And so in that respect, I thought of it as kind of homey, but it can still fit with Terrain.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I love how you were asking for not just the physical plants, but also for their stories to incorporate into this. So it's really a collage of materials and stories and experiences.
Right.
Wow. Just,
Right.
as you said, many layers.
Right, exactly. Now, this is 3 layers, but it's not stitched, so I guess.
All right. So we're not quite in quilt territory.
Right. And let me see.
Oh, and it looks like, and that one's at Smith College. So for any of our Massachusetts viewers, it's just down the road in Northampton, if you want to try to go by and see it in person.
Yeah, that one actually was, I was really honored that it was purchased in honor of their new library. They have a brand new library that was designed by Maya Lin. So I was really excited about that. And then we have something like the body. Okay, here's one. Let's take a look at this one. So this one is in the body series. But you can see it's got some plants there in the back. And it looks like it could also, oh, excuse me, it's from my home series. It's got the little house there. It's like a little jewelry box. You lift up the lid and then you've got this book piece and then kind of a mixed media necklace, stationary. It can't take it off of there without destroying it. So that would be an example of home.
And just really quickly, can you talk me through some of the materials that are in that necklace? I'm seeing, I think, a tassel and a couple of other things, but it looks like.
Yeah, sure. So let me just show you the little beads right there, the white, well, you can't see me touching my screen, but the white beads right in here are paper. So they're just recycled paper rolled into balls, little beads. And then we've got some chain, some of it's gold, some of it's silver, and then some of it's just base metal. I've got little balls of hair. This little brown thing here is called a scapular, which is my family's background is Roman Catholic, and when I was a kid, they told us we needed to wear the scapula. So if we died, we would go to heaven.
Oh, there you go. So it's
So
found another home.
yeah, there's a scapular, and then there's just like various found objects. Some of them are I believe this is like a little piece of amber or something, and I think there's a citrine and aquamarine. So there's just different things in here to make it up. And then it's also got thread that's been crocheted, and then that's a little clasp that's crocheted into a flower. And so basically the gist of this piece, it's about one of my grandmothers, and she loved to wear jewelry. And she was quite creative with her jewelry. One time I saw this picture of her wearing a red string tied around with there's something that was tied, connecting it. And so I thought, oh yeah, that makes total sense. Sometimes, you just want to be adorned. And that's what you got. So
yeah, absolutely. Wow.
Yeah.
And I know, sorry, if there was another one that you wanted to show us, we can do that as well.
Oh, no, that's fine. What do you got?
So I know that you have works from each of these collections that are featured in Fiber Stories. I believe Hair Day is one from the Body collection that's in Fiber Stories. So I was wondering if we could take a look at that really quickly.
Yep, here's Hair Day.
All right. So yeah, I mean, an incredibly striking, vibrant work. But what really stands out to me is that it incorporates hair as one of its materials. And I think you mentioned that book that we were looking at previously also incorporated hair. And I'm really, I'm just curious what drew you to hair as a material. I think that's unique among our Fiber Stories artists. So it's really something that stood out to me.
Yeah, so let me just point out where the hair is in this piece. So this black piece of handmade paper, well, several pieces that are collaged together, and you'll see it in different places in this work. But the hair is incorporated into that paper. And there's another piece there. But so basically, I think what drew me to hair to put it into my work, again, back to grad school, I wore my hair natural in its natural texture like this for many years. And I had this wild hair. One day I just went to the hairdresser and said, I'll just cut it off and relax it. And as soon as I did it, I thought, what the heck? Why did I do that? I don't know what I was thinking. And so then I started thinking about the reasons why I did that. And so there's this whole hair culture aspect of it. And I read a bunch of stuff, did a lot of research, talked to friends. I mean, it's really easy. I always say if you have two or three women together, a lot of times the conversation will end up in hair. Cross-cultural, every culture's got something about hair that they're going to talk about. So it seemed natural at the time to put the hair in the pieces that I was working at, because I was doing all of that research and soul searching, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's such a powerful identifier. It can speak to gender, it can speak to class, it can speak to race, and it's really tied up in people's identity. I think exactly as you said, that anytime a group of people get together, it's probably not going to be too long before hair comes up. But just really a pretty incredible medium to be working with. And I know. Definitely. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say, definitely, you're right about that. I mean, hair's got, it's got our DNA in it, right? So we're putting ourselves into the work. If you put hair into the work, you're putting yourself into your work, or you put yourself into your work anyway, even if you don't have a piece of your body in there. So there are a lot of parallels that I was really attracted to when I started doing that.
Absolutely. And you mentioned in the description of this work that it is hearkening back to a morning ritual. And I'm curious if you can elaborate a little bit more on what that ritual is.
Yeah, so most maybe not most, but a lot of Black people will identify with this, but we had what we call hair day. It was usually Saturday. So we went to mass Saturday evening. That was our thing as a family. But that Saturday morning, my mom had three girls, and then there's my brother. That's actually my mom standing and my sister sitting down. And we're all on the couch waiting our turn. So she's the last one. My brother, my dad's already cut his hair. And so all that whole morning, it's, watch cartoons and wait to get your hair done. And so that was just the ritual. So, yeah, that's basically what it harkens back to.
Mm-hmm. Wow, my next question was who do we have here in this photo? But you've jumped right ahead of me. And how did you go about incorporating it? Is it an actual print of a photo that you've incorporated, or is it some kind of transfer method that you used?
I think that this one is a transfer. So it probably was a slide that I had to scan out and then put onto probably that transparency paper, the inkjet transparency, and then I transferred it onto fabric and then, or paper, it might be fabric or paper, and then put it into this piece.
Mm-hmm. Wow, so really a blending of sort of new technology and techniques with, again, this sort of traditional quilting approach and collage approach. I'm not quite sure how many layers this one has, if I can call it a quilt or not.
Yeah, this one actually has 3 layers. So.
There we go. Well, excellent. Yeah, so that's hair day, and then I think in the in the terrain collection, I know Central Rose Maple, and I think there's also like a Viola Oleander one that are in Fiber Stories, if you have either of those handy to take a look at.
Here's Viola Hydrangea.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. I butchered the name. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. If it weren't written down in my records, I may not remember myself.
Well, it's actually a great segue, because it's incredible the specificity that you include, that exactly what the plants are and the names, and that you're being so exacting with what's included. And I know that you have a background in gardening, and so I'm curious sort of how that how those interests came together in your artwork.
So I think because I took paper, because I worked with paper, and during one of my classes, my paper making class, we basically boil down plants, and then that's the basis of paper. You can use cotton, or you can use I use sugar cane. We just did experimental things, use banana leaf. I mean, there's so many different things that you can use to make paper. And so it kind of got me started. Well, if I can grow this plant, wouldn't it be interesting to make paper out of it? And so I did a lot of experiments. I had my dad send some of his plants and incorporated those. And I thought, oh, this is so fun. And so that's kind of where it started. And then I started pressing the plants and adding them to the work, which is what you see here. And then they've stitched down. This, by the way, is 3 layers. So
a quilt. There we go. And it has stitching too. So yeah, yes. There we are.
Yes, definitely. And so then I started thinking, and more recently, I started thinking about, well, yeah, you can pulp the plant, cook it and pulp it. You can press it and sew it. You can also boil it, and it can turn into ink. So there's so many different things that you can do with the plants. And I just thought it was really interesting that, yeah, even the ones that can't feed us, outside of providing pleasure and for whatever the purpose is in the wild, you can actually do a lot of things with plants other than just looking at them and enjoying them and appreciating them.
Absolutely. And to that note, is the ink that the text part of this work is made in, is that ink that you made, or is it just something else that you worked with?
Yeah, no, this actually is graphite. And so when I was doing this, I was at the stage where I was pressing and adding the plants. The ink part is something that is very, very recent.
I see. And can you tell me a little bit about the text that is included in the back of this work? Is it similar to that first collage that we were seeing where the person who was sharing the plants with you also shared the text, or is it something that you paired?
Yeah, so this one is actually mine, I believe. I think this is a story that I had, a story of someone telling me a story.
A story within a story.
Yes, exactly. And so all of the texts that I put in the work are either snips of stories or whole stories. They're not just words. And the viewer can, even though there's a leaf on top of some of it, it's still something that could be read. And so I have lots and lots of writing that I've done. I've done interviews with a lot of my family members and friends. My aunt, I had an aunt who was a historian. She's basically the family historian, and she gave me permission to use her archives as source material. So I have a lot of stuff to pull from.
Yeah, absolutely. Having access to those archives must be just invaluable, and being able to collect stories from so many different generations.
Right, yeah, it's really special. I really appreciate all the hard work she did.
Yeah, absolutely. And from the home collection, I think we have I know we have a couple, but we have Continuum, and I believe some of the works, some of the gray and black and white ones as well.
So like this one, would you like to look at Continuum first, or?
I think if you have Continuum handy, we can start there.
Let's do that.
There it is. All right. So I'll say, this theme of quilting, this one looked particularly quilt-like to me. Is it indeed 3 layers and stitched?
Yes.
All right, excellent.
And this one's actually been in a quilt show.
Well, there we go. But another thing that I think is really interesting is that you've incorporated these Creole words and phrases, which really, from a storytelling perspective, add a whole nother dimension, because so much of a story is tied up in what specific words are used or in what language it's told. And I was wondering what inspired you to use Creole?
Yeah, so for this piece, I was thinking about connections. Well, a lot of pieces I'm thinking about connections, but in particular, I was thinking about my grandmother, for whom Creole was her first language. And I thought about the stories that my mom would tell about my grandmother. And I wanted to put some of that in. My parents spoke Creole, some Creole, but they didn't share it with us kids. It was their secret language, which we wanted to decode desperately. We took French so we could try to decode it and failed miserably, but we tried. But I really wanted to include that because as a connection, that it's a language, at least in that area, that's dying out. There's not a lot of people that speak it any longer. And a lot of the stories that I put in here tend to, and this one in particular, are ways of life that life is always changing, but this is a way of life. People might not have been aware that there's such a thing as Creole, or that there are different types of Creole, or that, this was a language that people spoke in this country, and some people didn't speak English first. And so those are some of the things I'm thinking about in this piece.
Yeah, no, I remember you mentioned that history of language and history of how folks have communicated was something that was really important to you, and the idea that there are folks in this country who either do not speak English or for whom English is not their first language, and it kind of ties back to some of the ideas that you were sharing about literacy and how, you know, maybe a lot of folks take literacy for granted today, but there are still folks for whom reading is maybe not a method that they would use to communicate, or, you know, if we go back a couple of generations, it wasn't a primary mode of storytelling necessarily. Do you have any of your books handy that might speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Well, why don't we try this one?
Mm-hmm.
So this one is called Edges, and it's an altered book. So the book existed, for those who aren't familiar with that, with what an altered book is. The book existed, and then I just changed parts of it so that the book now means something new. But there were 4 of these particular pieces, and they're all novels in Spanish, in the Spanish language. And what I did at the time this piece was made, or these pieces were made, there's a lot of dialogue about immigration. And basically the dialogue was illegal immigration. And the dialogue really had nothing to do with anything positive whatsoever. And I also felt like it didn't have a lot of times anything to do with the actual fact that it was illegal. It seemed very racialized to me. And so this particular piece, I wanted to show people that live on the margins, or communities that are on the margins, communities of color primarily. There's a lot of activity, and there's communication, there's creativity, there's a lot of stuff that goes on the margins, and some of it seeps into mainstream. And so if you think about this as you know, the margins are the marginalized communities, and then inside inside is mainstream, right? So it kind of flushes in there. They're connected even though you're still on the outside, and they affect each other. And another thing about this is that you can't always get to it, right? You can't read all the text in this book because it seems shut. And so there's that communication of what's actually on the page, but the piece itself says something different. It's got, it's synthetic hair, but it's African, you know, it's Black synthetic hair, basically, Black textured hair. And so it's immediately recognizable as other. So that says something else too. It's on the margins. And so I think that it says something, but it's coded. It's not written, even though there's some writing in there. And another thing that I like to think about is, what if somebody forget about whether they can read or not. What about if they couldn't see? Could they kind of feel this and see what it was? Could they kind of tell what it is? I think that they could. And so that's another thing that I'm interested in, is using all of the senses in order to create a piece.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. This one is particularly striking to me, you know, both with the color contrast, you know, knowing now that the text on the inside of this book is in Spanish. It's really, yeah, this one is, I think, really incredible. And I know, you know, it says it in your bio, it says it in many of the works that you do, that you address topics of race and identity politics. And I'm wondering if there are more works that you'd like to share that particularly highlight that theme, or if you'd like to talk about some of the rewards and challenges that you've seen in, you know, in tackling something that is so important and so central to experiences today.
Yeah, so I think given is that me? Did you hear that?
Oh, no, I didn't.
Oh, okay, good. Then I'm just hearing it, that's fine. So as far as challenges, I guess I I'm very introvert. I'm very much of an introvert. And so it doesn't seem like this way because I'm putting all this personal stuff out there, but it's still somewhat removed, right? But I think to talk about race in my artwork, well, I think that when people see my artwork and that people are going to place a person of color in a certain, they're going to look at us through a certain lens anyway, whether we want to or not. And I just figured I might as well just put out the things that are important to me, and whether anybody else cares about it or not. And I figure if I care about something, someone else will too, right? And so I don't want them to be necessarily preachy. I look at myself and I look at community, I look at the diaspora, and those are the kind of things that I'm relating it to on a personal level. So let me see. Does that make sense? Hopefully.
I think so, yeah. It's, you know, very grounded in your personal experience, but also seeking, you know, whether it's a common experience or something that can be shared. Absolutely.
Yes. So now this is one, remember I was talking about the hair pieces. I wanted to show that one. So this one is called Afrocentric, and this is made with synthetic and human hair. And most people, I've seen this one exhibited several times, and most people are really freaked out about this around here. Right there, right? Because hair is somewhat repulsive in a way. Some people are really repulsed, and some people are really attracted, or you're attracted to it when it's on the head, but when it's off, it's like, oh. But this actually is synthetic fiber. What they really should be upset about is this is where the hair is embedded into this paper. But I wanted it, everything is not, you know, there are a lot of heavy topics when it comes to race, but this particular one is celebratory. And I was just celebrating the creativity of hair culture. And it looks like a hat, which I thought was really fun. And, you know, it protects the hat, protects the head. The head is where your identity is, you know, your thoughts. And so I think about those kind of things. So yeah, it's about race, but then, you know, there are different aspects of it. I don't want to, I try to put multiple aspects or address multiple aspects, just depends on what it is that I want to say. Whereas this one, right here, this one is called Black is Every Color. And I made this one during when the pandemic was just starting, like last spring. And we'd listen to the news. My husband and I would listen to the news every morning, first thing. And it was just like, it was so heavy and so upsetting. And one day I looked out of my window and I saw the garden, and it was spring. For some reason, last spring was just so vibrant. And then I thought about Blackness overshadowing the color or infusing the color. Well, Black is every color. And so that's kind of where that piece came from. So still, it's about race, but, you know, maybe skewed.
Right, and another angle on it, which I think is so interesting. I will say this is personally one of my favorites of your work. I think it's just, I love the form of it and the way that it's arranged. I think the colors and the contrast with Black and the theme that Black is part of every color is really interesting. So I need to make a trip down to Rhode Island to go see this in RISD's collection. But I think
well, please do, and let me know how you like it.
I will. And I think it's a great segue for my next question, which is, you know, we talked a lot about how many of your works are inspired by quilts or use a lot of quilting techniques, but based on the definition of a quilt may or may not fall under that strict umbrella. And so this, I think, is one of your book works, but it's in a slightly different form than we might think of for a traditional book. So to you, or in your experience with getting into book shows or anything like that, what makes a book, and how are you trying to subvert that with some of your pieces?
Oh my goodness, what makes a book a book? Well, I think that is the $1,000,000 question. It's been argued and discussed. For me, a book says something, right? I personally think I look at things and I see just about everything could be a book, right? Not a traditional book. It's just like quilts, right? You have traditional quilts, then you have a quilt that might be made of sticks. So the same with a book. I think when it comes to an artist book, the opportunity that the artist has is that we're not, in an artist book, we're not limited to just a flat page, right? When you read a story, it's dimensional. If you're reading about a room, the author is talking about this room and then you can envision the room. Well, in an artist book, maybe the book itself is the room. And so it just adds another dimension to the message. And so I think a book is anything that will convey a message. It may have text, it may not have text. That Afrocentric that we just saw with the round one with the hair, it's a book, but it doesn't have any words in it. It still says something though.
Absolutely, and does have pages, I think.
Yes.
I'm a little curious, in a traditional experience with books, going to a bookstore, going to a library, so much of that experience is the interaction of the reader or reader to be picking up the book and opening it and turning a page. And I'm curious, this piece clearly has pieces that can be opened and can be turned a little bit. Is that something that you usually incorporate in a book, or are more of them static in terms of their viewer engagement?
Yeah, so most of the books are, they're interactive. So I'm really interested in the performative aspect of the book. In other words, the viewer as performer. I know that's a lot of times we think of the book itself as the performative object, but I think of the viewer as the performer. And I think that we can build the performance into the work so that the viewer gains another aspect of the story. And so I'm really interested in adding textures. I pay very close attention to the materials that I use, the way that the stories unfold, the movements that the viewer has to take, how they, what does this feel like? If I'm talking about a certain thing, and if I may, I'm going to show you one piece here.
Oh, please do.
Let me see. It is called Fire. And I actually I hope this works, but and I'll talk about it because there's no sound to it, but this is a book called Fire. And it's part of my elemental series. It's about the body based on 4 elements. And so this one is about fire and transformation. You see, I'm really interested in how the viewer has to experience it. So you've got the dark part, which could be wood, and you open it up and there's the color. They've got that kind of goldish color. That's the outside part of the fire. And as you get closer and closer in, the fire gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And then that thing that you're burning in the middle, you'll see that in a second. But, and so there are words in here. And look, she has to flip it. You have to go in that sequence in order to read the entire sentence. And then the main story is on this long scroll, and you can't tell on here, but the back part of the scroll is very, 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 very soft cotton batiste. The front is another type of cotton, not as soft as that, and that's where the story actually is. And then so it's a really long scroll. And so the viewer is unrolling the scroll. So that's performative. They're performing the unwrapping. And then you've got the center part here with you open up that envelope, and then here's like the little ashy piece that's left over. And it just says, love is greater than a distillation of words. And so as the viewer moves through it, they're building up to this story. And so that the movement is actually part of the experience of the piece.
Well, that is remarkable. And I'm so glad you shared that with us. Thank you.
Sure.
And yeah, just really interesting to see it come to life. And now there's this whole, there's both the process of opening and now the process of closure that we're getting to see.
Right.
That's another part of the experience is after you've read a book, you might put it back on your shelf and might want to reopen it and still have it be intact. So a little bit of a caretaking element.
Right. And you can kind of think about the words, think about the story as it kind of gives like a little rest period, just to kind of contemplate. It's kind of contemplative in a way.
Yeah. So the fire that you're referencing, I know you showed how some of the colors related to that theme. Is that addressing sort of an inner fire? Is it an external fire that you're describing, or is it really more of the colors that you're trying to?
No, it's actually internal fire. So all of these 4 books, I had earth, fire, water, and air, and they're all based on the body. Fire is more like transformation. It's emotion. It's about emotions. The main story in this book is when I was in 3rd grade, I went to a school that was being integrated, and it was just like, it was a hot time. And so it's that story. It's me thinking back on that story, taking parts of that. And so that's the main part of that story. It's a transformation of being an innocent, 3rd grader, and some of the things that I experienced that year, and then you're transformed into something else when you've gone through a particular experience. And that's basically what that's about. So another one, it has that in it, but it also has like themes of what is love, right? It's what about, in the envelope, a mother's love, for instance. When I had my daughter, I didn't realize, people tell you, give you all kind of advice with your kids, but you're really not prepared for that. And that's definitely a transformative. Becoming a parent is definitely transformative. And so there's some of that in there as well. And all of these 4 books have multiple stories or multiple aspects of that element in them.
Yeah, absolutely. My gosh, that integration of the school experience, transformative for you, I'm sure, and also for the school and for the country. That was a chapter of a lot of change. And yeah, it's also incredible to hear how many of your stories are rooted in family, whether it's objects and texts that are coming from them, or or other stories that are coming from ancestors or new members of your family, like your daughter. Are there any other works you'd like to share that speak to that?
Let's
Some of those
see.
family ties.
Sure, probably all of them to a degree. Let's see. How about this one?
Another book, I'm guessing.
Yeah, this is a book piece, and then I'm going to show you one of the ones that's in the show. So this one, my dad was in the service, so even though my parents are both from Louisiana, I did not personally live there except for 1 year when my dad was in Vietnam. That was it. So we would go visit whenever we were nearby, and or within some reasonable driving distance. And one of the things that I saw that I didn't see elsewhere were these little shrines that people had in their houses. And also not only the shrines, but there's oftentimes it would rain or storm, and one of my aunts would have this ritual. And I understand that there are a lot of people that have these rituals. I'm always hearing people are always sharing these, but at the time I'd never heard of such a thing. But she'd have us, we have to come inside, get inside, close the door, turn off light a candle, close the blinds. And so that's basically what this piece is about. I call it the storm sequence because it seemed very theatrical to me. And I just was always mesmerized when she would do that. And so this is the spirit of that, that ritual. Mm-hmm. And like I said, a lot of people do have some version of this, I've heard. And for this particular piece, the numbers on either side are years of documented, years when they've had storms that had significant damage. From the earliest record, I believe, was like 1860, and all the way, I think 2008. I think that probably was the year that I made this piece, or 2009 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then down at the bottom, I've got some hurricanes that affected this area significantly as well. So that's one.
And it looks like there's a little bit, sorry, before we move on too quick, it looks like there's additional text on the blinds that come down. Are those, do those move? Is that text readable?
It's readable. The blinds they work. And so it's that thing about close the blinds, turn off the television, let's see, calm down, light the candles. And so it's got this whole sequence. And then in the back, I think in the back, it's got layered text. So sometimes I'll put words on top of words. And in the back, I think it says, close the blinds, close the blinds, close the blinds.
A key part, yeah.
I did that by accident. But here's another one. So still speaking about visiting this area, we'd round the bend, and all of a sudden I would tell my dad, God, it just feels different. Every time we come around this corner, it just feels different. And so I'm just thinking about that in this particular piece is how can a place that is not my physical home have such a hold on me. And I know that I've heard people say that, they visit some place, maybe they've never even been there before, and they get there and it feels like home. It feels like they need to be there. And so that's kind of the idea that I'm getting at with this particular piece.
And I love that you mentioned specifically coming around the bend is that there's a lighter gray section near the center that has some curved stitching in it. Is that evoking the bend that you mentioned?
Yes. So my mother's family lived on the island side of an oxbow lake. And so when we went to visit, we'd have to make that turn. And so that is the turn that that's referred to in that piece.
Yeah. And I think there are a selection of pieces. I can't recall if this one is, or if it's some pieces like this that are in Fiber Stories as well.
This one is in Fiber Stories.
Yeah.
And this one is also.
Yep. I remember Simple Gifts. Yeah. And I think this one got a shout out the other day on the book and print artist and scholar collective that you're a member of, which is a really interesting group. And, they focus on, for those who aren't familiar, they focus on the unique potential of artist books as vehicles for social change and racial unity. And I'm curious if you can tell me a little bit about your work with the collective and how you got involved.
Sure. So the founder of the collective is Tia Blassingame, and she basically invited or put out an invitation for people to join. It's not a new group. I think it was formed right before the pandemic, maybe in early 2019 or so, I'm thinking. And so basically we've never even met in person, most of the members of the collective. But, and I think that we're just starting to ramp up. There have been a few events, a couple of panel discussions, and I don't have the email address on it here, but they've actually been recorded and can be viewed. There may be some collaborative works that are in the works, but it's basically a community and a support system is what I feel like she was thinking of when she wanted to get this group going. But it's really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure a lot of folks out there can relate to that experience of not having met the people that you're working with in person, especially if you've had a job change or had other life changes in the last couple of, year or several months, just with the pandemic and everything. But thank goodness for technology. It lets us connect in new ways. And,
right.
It's really exciting. I was really intrigued to stumble across some of the projects that they've been working on. And can you tell us a little bit about, I know there was a quarantine specific project that I think you were part of. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So there's a group or an entity, it's called the Quarantine Public Library. And if you Google Quarantine Public Library, you can pull it up. But there were two artists that started this, basically a free library where you can go in and download these one-page books for free. And you download it on a piece of paper. They've got the instructions on how you fold it in order to make your book. Or you can even download the whole library for a fee in one file, and the fee goes to a particular charity, and you can read about that on their website as well. But as a group, several of the collective members created books for the Quarantine Public Library. And I believe there's a page on their website you can just download all of the collective's books, or you could download everybody's book, which includes the collective's books.
Yeah, must be quite a challenge to tell a whole story in just one page.
Yeah, so basically I think you just think about one particular thing, one particular subject, and go at it, and then just kind of edit. But you can put, even though it's one page of paper, there are I think I want to say maybe 9 pages of the book, so there's still plenty of room to put information on. My particular piece for them was based on Black Americans that lost their lives due to police violence during that particular year. And it's basically, what I did was took all of the flowers, or most of the flowers that were growing in my garden during that time, and I made a collage of that, and it's kind of muted out so that it's a memorial piece basically. But there's really, I believe there might have been 9 of us that actually participated, and each one is very different.
Yeah, I would imagine. We do have a couple of minutes left here, and I want to make sure, I know I've been poking the conversation in several different directions, but I want to make sure that if there's a last story about a work or about your experience working with fiber that you'd like to share, I want to make sure that you have a chance to tell that as well.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought about any particular stories, except that I guess I can say that my work doesn't focus on people of renown. They're not famous, they're not celebrities. I've always really been interested, even when I was taking art history or whatever, and you'd see, say, a still life or something. The still life. So if you look at a still life, a lot of times, especially if you look way back, like Dutch still life, 17th century, whatever, it's people that were wealthy. But what about everybody else? What were they eating? What were they doing? What were they talking like? What did it smell like? What, you know, and
what's on their table?
yeah, exactly. I'm really interested in everyday stories. And I think that's why I just focus on my family, because we're everyday. I think we are. And so I feel like if I can focus on every day and, you know, use that as the entry point, I think that's kind of where I'm going with it. And, you know, I'm not a technician by any means. I learn whatever processes I feel are necessary in order to tell the particular story that I want to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, we definitely saw that today with the range of techniques and materials that you work in. So thank you so much for sharing all of those. It was really great to get a closer look and, you know, to just hear more of your experience behind the works. And folks out there who are watching, if you'd like to learn more about Alisa's work, you can visit her website, alisabanks.com. You can also visit her artist profile, which is on the Society of Art, or excuse me, her artist profile for our show Fiber Stories, which is on the Society of Arts and Crafts website under Craft Boston. I'll be sharing a lot of these links in the description of this video and also by email with all of our folks who registered. So if you don't have a second to jot them down now, that's okay. And I'd be remiss in saying that all of our programming is supported by generous donors like you in the audience. So if you'd like to support the Society of Arts and Crafts and the work that we do, you can text 4CRAFT, the number 4CRAFT, to 44321. Thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you'll join us for our next Fiber Stories event.